I'd like to start by thanking Nancy Netzer, the inaugural Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Director of the Macmillan, and also Rachel Chamberlain, who you just met, the Manager of Education, Outreach, and Digital Resources at the Macmillan, for making tonight's lecture possible. This lecture is in conjunction with a wonderful exhibition we have at the Macmillan this semester, Taking Shape, Abstraction from the Arab World, 1950s to 1980s. The exhibition is drawn from the collections of the Barjeel Art Foundation based in Sharjah, the United Arab Emirates. It's open for virtual viewing until June 6th for those of you outside the Boston College community. And for the BC community, it's open by appointment, and it's really, really worth seeing. It is really my distinct pleasure tonight to introduce Diana Abouali. She's the director of the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, and has been so for the past 2 years. Before that, Diana was the director of education, awareness, and outreach at the Petra National Trust in Amman, Jordan, and the head of research and collections at the Palestinian Museum in Birzeit, Palestine. She was, before that, an assistant professor of history at Dartmouth, and she received her PhD in history and Middle Eastern studies at Harvard University, where we first met each other, and I got the pleasure of knowing Diana since then. So without further ado, I would like to present our speaker and thank her, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Emine, for that introduction, and it's very nice to be here. I'm really happy, and thank you, Rachel, also for helping facilitate all this, and everyone at the Macmillan Museum. It's a real honor to be here today. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen properly. Let's see. Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint? Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right. Like Emine said, I'm the director of the Arab American National Museum, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about the museum, of course, and introduce it to you and talk a little bit about what we do, but try to focus more on the arts and culture aspect of it, and also about, the mission of promoting Arab American art and artists, which is a key component of the work that we do. Before I continue, I also want to do a sort of internal thanks to my curatorial team, who really helped me put together this exhibit, Elizabeth Barrett-Sullivan and Crystal McCall, without whom I wouldn't have this PowerPoint presentation, because they led me to all the images that you'll see. The Arab American National Museum is located in Dearborn, Michigan, and it's the first and only museum of its kind in the United States, which means that first and only museum of its kind in the United States, and it was founded in 2005, and it remains the only museum that's dedicated to talking about sharing the history of the Arab American community in the United States, and sharing the narrative and experiences of that community. We're located in Dearborn, Michigan, and there's sort of it's not a surprise that we're located here in Dearborn for two reasons. First of all, Dearborn is arguably the center of Arab American community life in the United States. Dearborn is a kind of a suburb of Detroit, and so we're part of the Metro Detroit region, and we're located in Southeast Michigan, and this region has the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the United States. Population-wise, there's more Arabs in California and the New Jersey, New York area, but in terms of concentration, this is the highest, has the highest rate. And if you come to Dearborn, you will see it. It's very Arab, streets, the shops on the streets, supermarkets, and the population of Dearborn is arguably about 60–70% Arab. The other reason we're located here is that we are part of a larger nonprofit called Access, which is the Arab Center Arab Community Center for Economic and Social Services. So it's a little strange, this model of a museum being part of a larger nonprofit and a social services and human services agency. This agency is located in Dearborn as well. It was founded in 1971 in a part of Dearborn called the South End. In the South End, you'll find the Ford Rouge factory, which when it opened in the 30s was the largest factory in the world and continued to be a very prominent part of the Dearborn landscape and of the Ford, automobile company. The reason it opened is, Arabs have been living in this part of the country for many years because they came to work in the automobile industry. They moved to Dearborn when this factory was opened in the 30s. So the Arabs have been in this part of the country for a long time. This human services was set up to help them, and it kind of expanded and grew over the next 50 years. We were an outgrowth of a cultural arts organization, arts program that was part of this nonprofit. And by 2005, we had grown into a museum. Part of the reason it sort of became this sort of standalone, sorry, not a standalone, but a kind of a institution of this larger nonprofit was in response to 9/11. And kind of there was a sort of a need to kind of address the sort of backlash and negative reaction to Arabs, to Arab Americans, to Muslims as well, and to sort of address a lot of the negative stereotypes that were happening. So there was a need to sort of do this museum in order that a kind of narrative, more authoritative and accurate narrative of the Arab American experience and the community can be found. So that's us in a nutshell. So the mission of the museum is to document, preserve, and present the history, culture, and contributions of Arab Americans. This sort of circular graph, it's sort of a way I think of the museum and how it works. It's nothing official. This is not like any official sort of document that we have. It's just the way I try to think of it. So there's basically three components of the work that we do at the museum. One is the sort of public history aspect, so telling the narrative, and that comes out through the core exhibits that we have. It tells the history of Arab immigration to the United States. It's through the archives that we have. We have arguably the most comprehensive archive of Arab American historical artifacts and documents in the country. So we have, we produce, sometimes produce publications on Arab Americans. We also have very much are focused on the community. Community is an important aspect of the work that we do. We're a community-based organization, partly because we're an outgrowth of that nonprofit I told you that is very much about serving the community, and not just the Arab American community, but anybody who needs these health and human services that we provide. But we provide a gathering space for the community. When we were open, we're currently closed because of the pandemic. We offered rental space. Organizations can come and use our space, and we work with the community also in terms of gathering the historical records and oral histories that we need to sort of build this archive and these narratives about the Arab American experience. And the final sort of aspect of the work is the arts and culture, which I'll focus on in this talk. And that's, since its inception, I think the founders of the museum, the first director, really made it a point and a priority to sort of focus on arts and culture, focus on Arab American artists, broadly speaking, whether they're visual artists or musicians or, poets. It was very clear that artists, through their interpretation of culture, through their interpretation of society, their environment, is a great way in which to present, sort of Arab American culture to a larger audience. And I think it's I'm speaking to sort of preaching to the choir here, where arts is always a great way to build bridges and to find common ground. So I'm going to sort of move in. This slide, I just want to give you a sort of inside look at the museum. We have what we call core galleries or permanent galleries. We also have a temporary gallery space that we use for our exhibitions. And through these galleries, we tell the history of Arab immigration. The top left corner or image is the ground level exhibit, which is kind of talks about Arab heritage. So what the Arabs were doing before they immigrated to the United States. And it sort of talks about, Arab, Islamic contributions to science and art and religion and what have you. If you go to the second floor, we have the galleries that tell the history of immigration to the United States. The first one is Coming to America, where we talk about who came, when Arabs began coming in the late 19th century, the different phases or periods of immigration, and so forth. And then the other two sort of talk about Arab American culture and how, once Arabs settled in the United States and sort of developed these hybrid cultures, what was life like for them, sort of, and private life, but also, outward public life and aspects of the culture. And the last one is called Making an Impact, which is essentially the who's who of Arab Americans, the walls of fame, Arabs who have made significant impacts on the life of this country in terms of creative arts, activism, politics, science, entertainment, what have you. So, like I said, promoting and supporting the arts has been a cornerstone of the work that the museum has done ever since its inception. One of the ways we do that is obviously through by being an arts presenter. So we spend a lot of our public programming sort of showcases Arab American artists or Arab artists who are in the diaspora or live in the Arab world. We bring them over, or even artists whose work and practice in some way meshes or jives with the mission of the museum. So this is just a sort of kind of some sampling of the performances we've had in the past few years. We've had dance performances. On your left is Leila Abdullah. She's Palestinian American, a choreographer based in Minnesota. In the top, you see Sinkane. He's a Sudanese American musician. And then in the lower half, those three images you see going from left to right, you have 47 Soul, which is a Jordanian Palestinian rap group, very, very popular among the younger crowd. They've been to us a few times. In the middle, you see Yasmin Hamdan, also a Palestinian singer, and she's actually performing at the Detroit Institute of Arts in the Rivera Court. And so that's also indicative of the kind of collaborations and partnerships we have with other cultural organizations in the Metro Detroit area and also nationally now. And finally, on the right side is Amr Efendim, who is a rap artist, spoken word artist, but has used some of the records in our archives to sort of recreate this little Syria, which is a part of Lower Manhattan where the Arab immigrants settled in the early 20th century. So if you know about Khalil Gibran and the Prophet, those group of, there's a group of writers and that they were living in that part of Lower Manhattan that no longer really exists. So he's sort of presenting a kind of performance that takes from the archives, but he sort of infuses it with his artistry and his music. Another way we promote the arts or support artists is we have a National Arab American Book Awards program that started in 2007 and has become a pretty important awards program that a lot of Arab American writers sort of look to and aspire to. So this is literary arts, but things still important to recognize. And we offer awards in 5 categories, 2 in nonfiction, 1 in fiction, poetry, and then children or young adults. But onto the more sort of artistic or art-centered work that we do in the way we support and promote artists. We have an artist in residence program that's been in effect since about 2016. And this is a program that I'm really proud of. We recently got a grant from the Mellon Foundation that has put in, sort of taken this program into overdrive. And we've been able to, bring in artists, offer them a generous stipend. We have a space where they can live and work. And it's through this program that we've really, I think, kind of made an impact on some of these artists that were able to come and be in residence or even do a remote residency this past year because of the pandemic. This is in a way directed at Arab American artists or Arab artists, but we really accept, again, artists to be residents regardless of their background, again, as long as their work and their practice dovetails or speaks to the mission of the museum. So we've had, Native American artists, we've had, Armenian American, and so forth. So And the artists, the residents aren't always visual artists. They could be writers, performers, photographers, dancers, choreographers, playwrights, what have you. So it's a very rich program, and our public programming has also benefited a lot because an essential component of the residency is that they do a community engagement project, which means they have to somehow somehow engage with the community, whether it's through a public performance or going to schools or creating workshops, what have you. So it's really been a kind of a boon to us, and we're really grateful for that. And just having the traffic of these artists come through the museum has been wonderful. Another thing that we've been able to do through this grant from the Mellon Foundation is that we've been able to commission artwork by Arab artists living in the United States or Arab American artists. And the museum itself doesn't have an acquisition budget. So it's hard for me to say that we actively collect artwork, but so what we have has been sort of collected through donations or master donations. But we've been able to commission a few artworks, some artworks by a few artists. The ones what you're seeing now are two works on paper by an Egyptian artist called Ganzir. He sort of came to prominence or became famous 10 years ago in Egypt during the revolution and during Tahrir and the Arab Spring. As a street, graffiti artist, but eventually he's actually does multimedia work, and he's based now in Houston. And this is part of a series he has called Immigrant Blues. And we were obviously intrigued by the series because our history of immigration, a museum on the history of immigration. And so he agreed to sort of add to that series and take this past year into consideration when doing that. And I like him a lot because he's, his work is obviously colorful but also very kind of tongue-in-cheek and but poignant at the same time. So the collection. So we've been able to commission works by Ganzir, like I said, by Yasmin Diaz as an artist I'm going to talk about in a minute, and also by a Sudanese artist called Mekdad Dakheri. He's a painter, also a recent immigrant to the United States. And we've commissioned, in collaboration with the University Musical Society in Ann Arbor, a composition by the jazz pianist Tariq Yamani, who was a Lebanese American based in New York. We have an art collection, like I mentioned, and it's clearly not a very large collection. We have a total of 128 works made by about 70 artists, 37 women and 33 men. Like I said, these are mostly donated to the museum. There's maybe been a few that we've been able to purchase, but not much. And the artists represent 10 countries. And we talk about national origin. We make a point of understanding what the national origin of these artists are, even if they are Arab American, because we really want to sort of be representational and representative of the diversity and the richness of this Arab American community. So to be considered an Arab American, at some degree, you have to have national origin in one of the 22 Arab countries. So we've been able to collect work by artists who come from 10 of those 22. They're listed here. I have an asterisk by Lebanon and Palestine because they have most of the works, or they have the most works contributed to the collection. And that isn't, again, it's not a coincidence. Until recently, the Lebanese, Palestinian, Syrian community was the most dominant one. And I think sort of were more visible, so to speak. So, but we're trying to sort of address that by identifying the different countries that we would like to collect art from, meaning Arab American artists whose ancestry comes from these other countries. Sort of representation and being and adequately, reflecting the diversity of the Arab American community and the demographics of the Arab American community is something that we're also very aware of needing to do. in the 20 years or 16 years since we opened, the demographics of the community have changed drastically. And so we're trying to keep up with that change. And one of the ways we can do it is through diversifying our public programming, and also by collecting works from underrepresented countries. And fixing our exhibits and updating them, that's definitely needs to be done, but that as you know, requires a lot of time and money, but it's a priority for us. Since our inception, we have had 33 temporary exhibitions of Arab American and/or Arab art, both solo and group exhibitions. And so, like I said, we have one temporary gallery space that can accommodate these exhibitions. We have two other kind of parts of the museum that we use for sort of small pop-up exhibitions, but this one space of about 1,000 square feet is where we can hold these temporary exhibits. The first one that was held in 2005, so very soon after the museum opened, and it might have even coincided with the opening of the museum, I'm not entirely sure. And it was called Invisible Contemporary Art by Arab Americans. And the curator was Salwa Miqdadi. She's currently based in Abu Dhabi, but is an Arab American curator, and has been very much involved in the Arab American art scene for decades. And in the catalog accompanying the exhibition, she writes that this is the first attempt at documenting the history of art production by Americans of Arab heritage, with the hope that others will further enrich and expand the debate on art of the Arab diaspora. So clearly seen as a kind of, watershed moment in Arab American art. I think, other exhibits had been done, but nothing as comprehensive as the one that she curated in 2005. And in fact, elsewhere in the essay, she says that, this was written in 2005. So she says 20 years before, so in the mid 80s, had she tried to do this, it would have been really difficult. That, what was needed would be less a curator and more a sort of private detective to find these Arab American artists who are working. Maybe a slight exaggeration, but I think the visibility has greatly increased. And I would venture to say that the museum has played a part in that. Just to show you some images from that first exhibition. So there was I think about maybe 10 or 11 artists that were exhibited. John Halaka on the left, Palestinian American, obviously an abstract artist. We also eventually did a solo exhibition for his work. On the right, we have Helen Zubaid, who's Syrian American. This work was done right after 9/11, Prayer Rug for America. She obviously, is sort of addressing the event, but sort of, I think maybe creating this sort of prayer mat, which is what, a Muslim would use to pray on. She's maybe calling for more reflection or sort of contemplation of the events and its implications. So she's a very interesting artist, beautiful work, very colorful. She often is inspired by she has a body of work that's inspired by folk tales and folk tales that her father used to tell her. Her father, who was born in Syria and came to the United States. And she's one of the more, I think, successful Arab American artists around. This one was also sort of part of that exhibit, and I like this one because it's a very sort of tongue-in-cheek and typical, I think, and very smart and typical of Emily Jasser's work. It's a sort of intervention piece. She asked friends of hers to send personal ads to the Village Voice, asking to, meet and marry or get together with a Jewish person so they could go back to Israel and live there. And of course, this is in reference to the law of return, which grants any Jew access, ability to go and reside in Israel or in Palestine. Of course, this right is denied to Palestinians, even though this is their homeland. So she was kind of, playing with that. And apparently there was a lot of backlash to this, and people thought it was some sort of, Palestinian terrorist conspiracy, or I don't know what. So it was a very interesting and again, Emily Jasser is a wonderful and I think very important artist. What I'm going to kind of do in the remaining time is talk about 3 artists that we've presented at the museum. We've done solo exhibitions for each of the 3. And, you know, there's no real reason that I chose these other than the fact that I like their work. I should say, I should give a caveat that I'm not an art historian or a curator. As MMA said, I did history and Middle Eastern studies. And so, you know, forgive me if this is not, you know, if this is a little superficial, my analysis or my explanation, but it's really work that these three artists each had a solo exhibit done for them. I think it speaks to their importance and their impact on not just the Arab American art scene, but the contemporary art scene as well. The first one is Sari Khouri. He is a Palestinian American. He was born in Jerusalem and came to the United States when he was 17. He studied at Ohio Wesleyan University, then got an MFA from the Cranbrook Academy of Art, which is here in Metro Detroit, and taught for many years at Central Michigan State. And what I like about his work is, I don't know, just the sort of, you know, he's an abstract artist, very, you know, kind of expressionist. I think started off as a figure, you know, working with figures, figurative art, but eventually moves into sort of abstract and expressionism. And I think that sort of maybe, you know, gave him obviously more of an ability to express his sort of emotions as an immigrant in the United States. What makes him, I think, very interesting for me also is that he's, you know, he's written a lot about art. He's published a few articles. In fact, he has one essay published in 1989 called Immigrant Arab Artists, Themes of Alienation, where he sort of grapples with and talks about the, you know, the sort of, not dilemma, but the situation that many Arab American artists find themselves in, or Arab artists working in the diaspora. And I think this is sort of, you know, goes for any immigrant artist or any artist who's forced to leave their homeland and work somewhere else, where it's sort of, there's this kind of duality that you're caught between two worlds, the current place where you live in, but also, you know, the nostalgia for the homeland. And, you know, he sort of borrows themes, symbols from, you know, Middle Eastern, Islamic, but also Byzantine iconography. And he's very much about sort of looking beyond, I think, the sort of figurative, the kind of symbolism that maybe is pertinent to a Middle Eastern or an Arab artist, and really like, looks to other, you know, other works, other canons. He's clearly, you know, he claims that he's, you know, impacted by Cubism, Surrealism, abstract expressionism. He has a structural sense of Kandinsky, and he sort of speaks, he sort of, you know, relates to the spontaneity of Matisse. These are all his words. Yeah, just, you know, really beautiful art. The one on the left, as the Untitled one, I don't know if some of you know Arabic, you can see sort of stuck in a phrase in there, and it says kalam farigh, which means literally empty words, but I think it also means nonsense. So, you know, bringing in this sort of Arabic sensibility, but, you know, I think in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way. The next artist I want to talk a bit about is someone called Nabi Musa. He is a Syrian American born in Damascus and came to the United States when he was about 12. He was born in 1967. And the exhibition called American Landscape, an Exploration of Art and Humanity, was his first solo exhibition. And apparently when he had tried to find a space to exhibit and could not find any, you know, gallery or museum that would take this body of work to exhibit. He's an openly gay artist. This body of work, you know, is a kind of critique of, you know, American politics, of the Constitution. You see a lot of the, you know, the flag repeated, you know, several times. You see a lot of these sort of same-sex images of, you know, men and women holding hands, a reference to sort of gay rights and the inability of gay people, the LGBTQ community, to realize their full rights as citizens. Orange is infused also throughout you see a lot of the color orange throughout this body of work, this American landscape. And he claims that it has to do with, again, harking back to 9/11, which seems to be a pivotal movement for many, many artists. And it's kind of in reference to the sort of code orange that Bush and his administration had implemented, that, there was a high, fear or possibility of some sort of terrorist attack. And yet he kind of perceives orange as a sort of warm and hopeful and sweet color as well, because of oranges and associated. Anyway, he was trying to get it presented and couldn't really find a place, and reached out to the museum and asked if he could present here. And they of course agreed. And it turned out to be, quite a success for not just the museum, I think, to sort of, present the work of an openly gay Arab artist. Dearborn remains a pretty conservative, city, town, the community especially. But also for him, it gave him national exposure. The New York Times picked up on it and wrote an article about him. And since then, apparently his career has just sort of flourished. And I think this is sort of, this doesn't happen too often, but this kind of is what we, would aspire to when the museum tries to help artists. And we didn't, expect this to happen, for his career to sort of just, explode. But it really speaks to, what supporting artists and what, when the Arab American community can rally behind artists, what can happen to them, and how we all benefit from it. The final artist I want to sort of focus on, or talk a little bit about, her name is Yasmin Diaz, and she is a Yemeni American, grew up in Chicago, and she's a multimedia artist as well. And she was an artist in residence at the museum in March, and was also putting together an exhibit called Soft Powers, which addresses sort of, looks at teenage life of girl teenage life in the 1990s, which is when she was a teenager, and kind of how girls of her community, or Yemeni American girls, or immigrant girls, have to navigate these different worlds, the home life and the cultural expectations placed on them once they leave the home and they're out in school, how they kind of navigate and code switch is what she calls it. So these are fiber etchings that she's done, and as you can see, it was in the exhibition, the temporary gallery. We had put it up. It wasn't, there's still some work to do. There was also an installation, a bedroom, sort of a girl's bedroom, where she sort of recreated a kind of Yemeni American girl's bedroom. And I want to actually, I'm going to let her speak for herself. We have a short video that we made of the exhibit. And the reason we did this video is because obviously this was supposed to open, she was in residence in March. We had hoped to open it March 28th of 2020. COVID happened and we had to close on March 13th. So no one has seen this exhibit. I mean, the public has not seen it. And I just want to skip ahead for a second. And we finally found a solution to, giving the public some peek into her exhibit. We remain closed to this day to the public, but Yasmin came back to Michigan recently, and also has an exhibit in, I think, the Institute of Humanities in Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan. And we sort of, thought, oh, well, maybe we can, we worked with her and we recreated our own sort of window exhibit. And so we've taken parts of the installation, brought it to the window here, which is looks onto the library at the museum. And we kind of rotate some of the etchings that she has, fiber etching that she has in the exhibit. So I'm going to now switch to a video. Let's see if I can do this.
The first things you see when you walk in are the fiber etchings. The images are based on personal photos, my own and others I collected from Yemeni American friends and family. And they're photos that we took of each other when we were teenagers, just hanging out in our own spaces. At that age, there was often a feeling of being hyper-surveilled. In some diasporic communities, there can be a sense of communal obligation to protect young girls who are becoming women, but for us as teenagers, there was a fine line between protection and control. With this work, I wanted to focus on those moments when we were amongst each other and not having to worry about who might be watching. Soft powers refers to what I consider to be a kind of superpower. To put it simply, it's like code switching, but much more than that. Going back and forth between a collectivist culture at home to an outside world that encourages individualism, and you add to that layers of very different gender expectations. It's a lot for a teenager, so we adopt these nuanced and sometimes covert skills to help us navigate our different worlds. The fiber etchings are made by essentially the same process as burnout fabrics. It involves applying an acidic paste to the fabric, in this case silk rayon velvet. It's then activated by heat, and then the rayon, which is the fluffy part of the velvet, is literally etched off. Burnout fabrics are more commonly used in clothing, and they were popular in the 90s, which is a time period I refer to a lot in my work, and when most of the photos used as source material were taken. I also remember seeing burnout fabrics used in a Yemeni style of dress called a direh, which some people say should only be worn by married or engaged women. It's usually made with a sheer material and is often embellished with details like beadwork or sequins. At the end of the gallery, behind a partition wall, is an installation of a bedroom. It's the third iteration of this space, and this time it belongs to a fictional pair of sisters, Dina and Saba. I collaborated with author Randa Jarrar, who wrote the text for the girls' diaries, and along with the objects in the room, they tell a story of their lives as teenagers in the 90s, from seemingly trivial obsessions to the more complicated issues they're dealing with. There's also a landline phone that plays recorded conversations I've collected from the same women who contributed photos for the etchings. I think installation is an effective way to give perspective to another person's world. Walking into even what you know is a fictional bedroom feels immediately intimate and can build empathy and understanding for someone whose life may be very different from your own.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up now, but just by talking briefly about Arab American artists and can we talk about a category of Arab American art? I'm going to stop sharing my screen just because there really isn't much more to show. And this is something that I've sort of thought about, and I think when I was talking to M&A, is this something, would this be interesting? Like, what is American art, and can we talk about a category of Arab American art? And I don't really have an answer, to be honest. I mean, I think there are aspects of work produced by Arab American artists that, maybe appear, or themes that appear, in several works. And I think, things like, alienation, exploring identity, leaving the homeland and being nostalgic for the homeland, placemaking, trying to make a place for yourself in this country, and also dealing a lot with politics that are happening back in the Arab world, politics that are happening here. So very sort of politically astute and activist, sort of, maybe not activist, but very much attuned to the political situation, in the Arab world. And to my mind, when I think about politics, I think of, there's an artist called Sema Shaibi. She's a photographer based in Arizona, and half Iraqi Palestinian. Plays a lot with these different images and of Palestinian women as terrorists. Plays a lot with the sort of Layla Khalid, that kind of imagery, but also deals a lot with Orientalist imagery of women and Arabs, and plays around with that. So there are things that they all sort of do address. Whether there's a sort of category or genre, it's hard for me to say, because the mediums they use, the approaches they have, the specific topics they address are just as varied as any other group. So we at the museum we talk about Arab American artists, we talk about Arab American art, because really what we want to do is sort of uplift and promote their work and support them, and really help them make a mark on whatever sector or ever place they're working. But to be honest, I think that they produce art. They're American artists. Their work speaks to and is part of the conversation and the work of contemporary American art, and they happen to be Arab American. So does it impact their work, their background, their upbringing, their worldview? Of course, but I don't see it as a sort of separate category is what I'm trying to say. So, and what they do again is very, I would think, similar to any sort of immigrant group that is working in the diaspora. These are very common and universal issues that immigrants face. So I'm going to stop here, and I know that was a pretty quick overview. I don't know if I did the museum justice or the work that we do in terms of supporting Arab artists justice. We do a lot of work, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and I hope that if you come to Dearborn one day, you will stop by the museum and pay us a visit. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana.
Thank you.
This was really great. It was a wonderful introduction, and it's such a treat to learn about I don't know much about contemporary art, so for me it was a great treat to learn about the work of three artists that I didn't know about, that produced such sort of different but very moving work. I was really taken by that video too, as clearly was another one of the audience members who wants to know whether the artist produced the video or not.
No, we produced, well, I'm trying to think. We commissioned, well, we had it done because she had, I think she left, no, she was I'm trying to remember now. This was like, I think we actually, no, we recorded it. We must have recorded it in the gallery. I think we produced it, yeah. But it was done for us because we couldn't open to the public. So we thought, well, it's such a shame. And so we had this done and put it on YouTube, and I think she's also shared it on Vimeo.
It's beautiful, beautifully done. So, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So thank you for this wonderful introduction. There are some questions in the chat, so I'll just reiterate and remind everyone what Rachel told us in the beginning. You can either, or maybe you didn't say this, but I was meant to do that part. You can either raise your hand by, if you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand by clicking on the reactions button in the lower right corner of your Zoom screen, and you'll see a raise hand function. I'm doing it right now. And then you can press the same button to lower your hand if your question has been answered. Or you're also welcome to type questions into the chat, and I'm happy to read the questions to Diana. And
actually, I remember what happened with the video now.
Okay, what happened with
went back to Los Angeles. We filmed the gallery, and then I think she in Los Angeles had somebody film her speaking, of course with an etching behind her. So that, I think, then we edited it and presented. That's what happened, because she left mid month. So
yeah. It's beautifully done. I think, and does such a nice job of capturing the exhibition and the spirit of the exhibition.
Yeah, it's really, she's a pretty amazing, artist, I think, and just a great person all around.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with at least a few questions from the chat, but please do ask more questions and raise your hands too. Nancy Netzer has a question, our director here at the Macmillan. Do the Arab American artists you encounter seek a connection to contemporary artists in the Middle East?
Yes, very much so. I think, you know, a lot of these, what's interesting about this community is, even though, you know, the community's been here for generations, since the late 19th century, but I think more and more are more recent immigrants, so maybe first or second generation, and are constantly going back to their, you know, countries of origin. So there's a constant conversation with the artists there, contemporary artists that are working there, and those that are you know, living and working in the United States. So it's a very global, I think, also kind of community and practice as well. So yeah, they're very, I think, aware. I think I always wonder if the Arab artists working in, you know, in the Middle East, North Africa, are as aware of the scene, you know, the artists working here. I think there's probably more, and again, I'm just speculating, there's more probably exposure of Middle Eastern artists to the United States. So I don't know if it's an equal sort of movement, but that they do talk to each other, they work with each other. They're also exhibited in the Middle East and often as well. Mm-hmm. Not all of them. They're like, you know, key artists and but yeah.
Okay, there's a raised hand, Nasser Rabat.
Thank you. I didn't think that my turn will come that quickly, but thank you, Diana. It's more of a reflection than actually a question, so feel free to dismiss it and not to answer it. But from your presentation and from what I know about the museum, it seems to me that the museum is being loaded with so many goals or so many agendas and programs, because I mean, there is sort of like the Arab and the Arab American and the Muslims and the Arabs, and how do you represent this, and what kind of exhibitions are going to satisfy these different agendas. And so I'm wondering if there is a plan for sort of like streamlining or specializing, because ultimately with the resources that you have and the space that you have, you will need to make choices. Some of them might be very hard choices, but it seems to me that one could start anticipating, in a way, sort of like the need to plan for focusing or perhaps specializing. And I wonder, first of all, if you agree with my assessment, and second, if there is such thinking about where the museum would go.
I agree, yes, to some extent. I mean, I think, you know, we do try to focus on, you know, Arab Americans. That's what was sort of our priority, so to speak. But I think if you're referring, you know, we also try to sort of, I don't want to use that expression to build bridges, but we try to sort of find common ground with other you know, ethnic immigrant groups in and around Dearborn and Detroit and even nationally. But I mean, it's a hard line to sort of, you know, if we just focus on Arab Americans and not Arab art or Arab artists, it's very hard to sort of, I think, do that if that's what you're sort of, you know, speaking about. I think, you know, the experiences, the work, the way they, you know, what they're thinking about, it's you know, hard to kind of distinguish who's Arab and who's Arab American. And many of these Arab American artists don't consider themselves Arab American either. They sort of like, we're Arab artists, we just happen to live in the United States. But I do see that there is a kind of, you know, we do try to tackle a lot sometimes, and I think it does end up being a little, maybe there's some thinness to what we do because we aren't, you know, sort of laser focused on one particular group of artists or one particular theme or you know, mission. But I think when you're sort of working with Arab Americans and you're addressing the whole community, it's hard to be laser focused because it's such a diverse community. And, you know, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Islam thing, the Christian, you know, people come in, they say we're too Muslim. People come in, they say we're too Christian. I mean, it's you know, you never win. So I don't know if that's what this answers your question, but I kind of see.
If I may actually
Yeah.
clarify my question, will you allow me, Amine? I'm not sure if I might be taking too much time, but there are 2 points that I wanted to really focus on. One is the museum as a locus of nostalgia. And your museum does function as such. And the second is when museums are burdened with the function of having to defend or to humanize, namely to actually constantly say, we're good, we're not terrorists, we're not fundamentalists, we're not God knows what. These are very valuable functions and they need to be perhaps fulfilled. But what I'm saying is that they create too much on the plate of the museum to be able to respond to. And I'm now referring to the idea of a museum, a place where you go to, like, if you want to enjoy a cultural or an artistic presentation. So my question is really about, not about whether you are doing something that need to be revised, but about the kind of burden that is loaded on a museum that is called the Arab American Museum.
Yes, that's what I say. Yes, very much so. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I think this is a much larger conversation, but I agree what you're saying. I mean, it's hard to find that balance. Yes, we do sort of, you know, deal with nostalgia, although we try not to, but you can't not do that. But and there's several reasons why we do it, not just because we're a museum, that's what museums do, but also because there's a lot of patrons who want us to sort of delve into that and represent this kind of, you know, this image they have of Arab America when, you know, Teta and Sitti in Jeddah were, you know, making kibbeh for me. And it's not to say that that isn't a legitimate kind of aspiration to come in and relive that childhood or those memories, but it's, yeah, it's I guess what I'm saying is the role of museums now is also just, it's all over the place. And it's quite hard to sort of figure out what we need to do and what we don't need to do. And I'm not being very articulate, but I see what I know what you're saying, and I agree with you. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you both. Can I turn to some more questions, Diana?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So Nassif Reyes wants to know if there's a criteria for selecting artists to be promoted by the AANM.
A criteria?
How do you choose the artists, I guess?
Sorry?
How do you choose the artists whose works you exhibit?
I mean, so if it's an artist in residence program, there's an application process, and it's a competitive process. In terms of exhibitions, you know, it's a sort of, there's a committee, you know, staff, we get some outside, you know, input into what maybe who should be presented. You know, I think, for instance, Sari Khoury, one of the three that I talked about, you know, he's a sort of native son. He's, you know, lived in Michigan since, you know, for 30, 40 years. And, you know, also had done a mural that hangs or is located in one of Access's, the parent organization's buildings. So I think and also he's, you know, legitimate and you know, an incredible artist. And I think the decision to give him a solo exhibition was sort of, you know, a kind of, in order to honor his memory. He had passed away in 1997, and is to honor his memory and sort of show respect for him and his work and his contributions. You know, it's people come to us, like Nabi Musa came to us, and sometimes it's people that we know, or, you know, word of mouth, and there's not always a sort of scientific way we do it, but it's it's a bunch of things that leads to a decision. I mean, and there are certain artists who are, you know, very important that we have not exhibited. Samia Halabi is one. That's, you know, this is a problem. I think, you know, we need to sort of. She's a major, you know, artist, arguably the most important Arab American artist in America, one of the most, a very important American artist, and we have not, you know, I think exhibited her, and I think she's due a retrospective, and she's a prolific artist. You know, I don't know if our temporary exhibit space will accommodate all her, but this is something that we need to do and address. So it's you know, yeah, I mean, there's no one reason or criteria, but it's a bunch of variables that come into play, I guess.
As it is in any museum, I'm sure. There's a short, easy to answer question and a longer one. I'll go with the easy first. Because this is from Diana Larson, says, thank you for this most interesting presentation and the important work you're doing. She's curious to know whether there's a museum or institution doing similar work in Canada, where there are many Arab Canadians, and if so, might there be possible collaboration?
So as a Canadian, thank you for your question. But I don't think so. No, I don't think there's a museum, not that I'm aware of, no. We've worked with some Canadian artists, but no. There's a sort of, there was an orchestra, there's like an Arab orchestra in Canada. I think they're based in Windsor, which is right across the river from Detroit. But apart from that, I'm not really aware of any initiatives like a museum or a cultural center. But if there were, we would be very happy to collaborate for sure and partner with them.
Of course, you're not too far away from Canada.
No, we're like 15 minutes. Yeah.
So this is the more complicated one. I'll read it slowly. Philip Geisler says, thank you very much for your informative presentation. I wondered about the role that Islamic culture plays in your programming and displays beyond maybe the immediate aftermath of 9/11, of which you showed us one example. How do you connect the potential category of Arab American art to Muslim communities and both traditional artistic practices and contemporary Islamic art as part of the museum's agenda?
Yeah, hold on. I'm very underslept. Just I wonder about how do we connect potential category of Arab American art to Muslim communities and both traditional artistic practices? Islamic culture, it's hard to, I mean, we try to be secular as, in a sense, as much as possible. We don't sort of try to present Islamic work or Christian work or art. And as I said, regardless of that decision to do that, we're still sort of accused of being either too Muslim or too Christian. It doesn't play, it's not a sort of explicit policy or principle to sort of do Islamic culture or present it, but it seeps in, you know, it comes in regardless because of, you know, first of all, the Dearborn community is predominantly Muslim. The Arab American community is 50-50 Muslim and Christian. So it is going to kind of appear at some point. We've had artists who look at, you know, deal with the hijab and talk about the hijab, talk about other aspects of their Muslim identity. We, you know, but we sort of try not to bring in religion as much as possible. We kind of, you know, sort of leave it, although we do sort of, you know, pay tribute to the different holidays and acknowledge that the religion is an important part of any community's culture, and especially the Arab American culture.
Mm-hmm. There are a few reminders in the chat about, to go back to the Canada question, about the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto.
Oh yes,
which of course is a very different kind of institution than you are in terms of displaying Islamic art as opposed to dealing specifically with either immigration or Arab art even, or Arab American art. So it's interesting, it ties into the question you were just answering in terms of the Arab versus Islamic. this kind of museum, that kind of museum. A lot of this is, of course, bound up together.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, so that we have that introductory exhibition that I told you about when you come in and it's like, the Arab world's greatest hits, like before, 1700 kind of thing. And that's we're really trying to rethink how to do that exhibit. And I think that's where people have a problem with it, because either it's too Muslim and, not all Arabs are Muslim, or we get a lot of emails like, these guys that you mentioned are actually Persian, they're not Arab, so I think the problem comes when we try to sort of talk about this sort of the historic, the history of the what were the Arabs, the history of the community prior to immigration. And it's important for us to sort of, I think, I don't know, we need to readdress it, because I think that's where some problems with Islam and Christianity sort of come through, and it does create some sort of issues for us.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm noticing the time, we've gone over and gone beyond 6 o'clock, so I know we need to stop soon, or now actually. There's a raging discussion in the chat between Nasser and who is this? Yumna Masarwa, all about sort of reactions. As a reaction to Nasser's comment, isn't it always the case, this category of museums, museum of society, etc. So there's a lot for us all. You gave us all a lot to think about. So we thank you very much for that, for inspiring this debate and the series of questions. And we also learned a lot. I'm particularly grateful to have learned about these artists. And just want to say thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Emine. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.